Please join me in welcoming the Deloitte team and their panel on digital wallets in Australia and globally. Joining us are Marlies Laros, who is the Director of Strategy at Monitor Deloitte, Zach Aaron, who leads Deloitte's global payments practice, and in the studio, Rajat Jain, the national leader of Deloitte's payments advisory practice. Please do continue to raise any questions for our panel in the Slido app. And over to you, Marlies.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time today. I'm Marlies Laros. I'm a director at Deloitte, specialized in banking and payment strategy. And I'm joined by my colleagues Rajat Jain, payment sector lead in Australia, and Zach Aaron, payment sector lead globally and in the US. As Andy mentioned, today we'll be talking about the future of the digital wallet in Australia. We will do this by unpacking the following questions through a panel discussion. The first question is, why should we talk about digital wallets? The second is, what are super apps and what is the noise about super apps? The third one is, what is Australian digital wallet experience today? And the last one, what is the future of the digital wallet experience going to be in Australia, going forward? So to start with the first question around, why are we talking about digital wallets? Well, in our point of view, digital wallets will form the new battleground in payments, as it is the primary channel through which service providers can interact with their consumers and form really deep relationships. Australia can actually be regarded as one of the leaders in digital wallet uptake, and it's underpinned by three main drivers. And I think it's very much in line to some of the presentation notes of the governor of the RBA. The first point is really around the movement to a cashless society. And outside of Europe, Australia is actually leading in terms of contactless payments. The second one is the adoption of e-commerce and m-commerce, which has been further accelerated by COVID. At the moment, within Australia, and in particular in terms of e-commerce payments, digital wallets already takes up about 25%. And we see most likely these numbers to grow up to about 30-35% in the next 1 or 2 years. The last one is the next generation consumers, being millennia and Gen Z. These types of consumers are really demanding digital first and customer and digital orientated propositions. These types of customers really demand convenience and speed to not only manage their financial well-being, but also really able to manage their lifestyle choices in one go. And this is where the super app comes in, where we really believe that the super app can deliver on those types of demands. So what is a super app? And we actually thought, let's start with how Wikipedia is defining super apps. And how they're defining super apps is around a mobile application providing multiple services, including the payment and financial transactions, becoming a self-contained online platform for commerce and communication across different aspects of both personal and commercial life, commercial life. In our words and in our terms, it's basically a one-stop shop that brings together both merchant and consumer lifestyle ecosystem in one place and generates a rich value, a rich data set that's going to drive value for both consumers and businesses. From a consumer perspective, what super apps are really bringing is a user experience that's seamless, convenient, fast, but moreover is very personalized. It's basically solving more than one problem than what typical banking apps would provide to consumers. From a business perspective, what it really enables them to do is generate new sources of revenue that are usually also very much capital light. It also provides access to new customer segments, in particular working through partnerships, new ways to engage with the existing customer base, and all against a lower cost base. So if we go to the next slide. Who's leading the charge at the moment? Well, as you may already know, in particular Asia, there is a proliferation of super apps at the moment. And it's been pretty interesting where it has been starting to really focus on shifting basically the underbanked and underserved population to a more mobile banked population. It's now actually seen as a very effective mechanism to deepen customer relationships and also deepen customer lifetime value through reach, loyalty, and share of wallets. We've highlighted 4 examples on this page, and I won't go through each of them in a lot of detail, but I want to highlight some common themes across all of them. I think the first overarching theme is that what all these apps do really well is orchestrating the entire customer experience across both financial and lifestyle ecosystems by providing both basically the traditional payment services as well as broader banking services or financial services across various lifestyle categories. So you can think about travel, entertainment, shopping, electricity, telco. It's basically a one-stop shop where you can manage everything in one go. What it enables these organizations to do is basically 2 really important things. The first one, it's about generating defensible customer data that can be monetized. Monetized in a way that they can provide targeted products and services to their customers, as well as provide more personalized engagement and experiences to their consumers. The second one is it really much focused around driving a higher customer interaction volume, very much focused about having strategic touch points along the end-to-end customer journey through that ecosystem of products and services that can either be provided through their own products, but also through partnerships. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. So basically, it's one app that has all the features of a bank, but also more with a better user experience. Well, these types of apps are very much used in Asia. What we're still seeing in the Australian market is that the average consumer has a wide diversity of apps. And maybe you already know yourself, when you're looking at your own mobile, you've got probably a variety of different apps trying to manage your own financial and broader lifestyle. I assume you might have 1 or 2 digital mobile wallet apps to have sort of point of sales type of payments. If you're an active BNPL user, you would have more than 1 account. We also know today that 1 out of 5 consumers have a crypto wallet, and we also know that about 29 to 30% of the Australian consumers are already using some sort of type of crypto. Although money management apps are not very prevalent to date, such as Frollo, but we really believe that these become or will start to emerge over the next couple of years once open data and open banking become more standardized across both financial services, energy, and also telco. So that brings us to the last category, banking app. And I assume all of us have at least 2 or more banking apps to sort of manage our day-to-day banking activities. And we really believe that these more traditional banking apps, and we're already seeing that in the market, are starting to evolve to provide more super app types of experiences. And the reason why they're doing that is very much focused around maintaining and deepening the customer relationship and overarching value, but also to respond to the increased competition that we're seeing across the entire financial services ecosystem, as well as managing margin pressures. I think we all know that we've got the entrance from the UK coming in with more broader propositions beyond banking, as well as the big tech organizations that have consumer propositions and inserting financial services into their broader propositions. So having that all said, really wanting to bring it back to our original question, what does this all mean for Australia, and particularly in terms of the future of the digital wallets? And I'm really keen to get a bit of a broader perspective of my colleagues, Rajat and Zach, on this as well. I might start with you, Rajat. What do you think we're going to see in terms of the proliferation of payments and financial apps in Australia?
Thank you, Marlies. Yes, I think we will continue to see proliferation. If you just look at the BNPL wallet section there's 7 apps on the page. There's about 25 or more out there. And every time I think we've surely reached peak number of BNPL apps, another few pop up. Crypto wallets, Governor Lowe talked about it as well. We're going to see a lot. We've already got over a dozen odd exchanges and wallets operating in Australia. We're going to see a lot more. Early days for PFM, like you rightly called out. Frollo's already got about 150,000 users. But I think we will see specialist PFM apps come in, and also, as they are able to do action initiation, build out their ecosystems further. So I think we will continue to see proliferation. But at the same time, I also believe that we here in Australia are on the cusp of a super apps phase.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think you're already seeing that at CBA, who's really sort of trying to build out the features of their existing app to both include merchants, BNPL, and crypto, particularly over recent months. So can you expand a bit more around why do you think we're at that pivotal point at this stage?
Yes, and like you said, you answered you answered your own question. The fact is, it's already happening.
Mm.
CBA, like you said, is already integrating or has integrated all of these features into its app. The neobanks like Revolut are leading with being the global financial super apps for their customers. People like Afterpay are now getting into broader financial products with their Money app in partnership with Westpac. And then the big technology companies, Apple and Google, as well as PayPal, will continue to build out their ecosystems and keep digitizing physical wallets, perhaps in the US first, but then importing that into Australia. So I think that the strategy or the ambition and intent of a number of these organizations to become super apps is pretty clear. But the strategic drivers around why they're doing it, is it for acquiring new customers? Is it for enhancing and retaining their customers into their experience? Is it to unlock new revenue streams or new business models? Those vary. And I think the speed to market will vary as well. But yeah, you're seeing that happen. So it's not new news in my mind. It's just an acknowledgement that this is something that is coming.
Thanks for that. And Zach, can you give a bit of a point of view around what you're seeing, particularly in the US and Europe around this as well?
Absolutely, Marlies. And the stories, as you would expect, are going to vary a lot based on the region, the economy, and some of the broader strategy and other economic forces that are at play here. For the U.S., as an example, I think we're really still in chapter one. The U.S. has taken very much a lower regulatory, more market-driven approach around how financial services and payments are evolving. We clearly see growth and we clearly see changes. We recently just did a survey about 2 months or so ago that actually talked about payment habits and mobile payment habits and their change as a result and how they've changed during the pandemic. And yeah, some of the more interesting aspects, we went beyond do you use your phone to make a payment, but really for what? And common things now, for instance, like groceries, 60% of our respondents said they use mobile payments to buy groceries. So that tells us that we're moving into the, if you will, day-to-day how I live my life type use cases. Interestingly, when we said what things would you want, more than 1 in 3, about 36%, said that they would actually like to see their, if you will, wallet app or digital app become a super app. And the ability for it to almost really be a financial superstore. So that's more than 1 in 3, and they even said that would be a reason for them to select who their overall financial institution is and who will own their overall relationship. So we certainly see the stickiness, but we're still very much in the early stages. A lot of what's proliferated have been merchant-driven propositions like paying for coffee, donuts, P2P. Looks a lot like what we saw in Australia. But I think we're going to start to see some bigger moves come out there. One reason, and it's been mentioned throughout in this conference, is crypto, and even the younger demographics and some of the bigger or sort of newer super apps that have been put out there. A big drawing attention has actually been the crypto aspect of it, and not to have crypto on the side, but actually holding crypto, buying and selling crypto, be part of what fundamentally is overall financial usage and management. So you have the ability to hold your US dollars. You also have the ability to trade in crypto. You also have the ability to make payments. And so that feels like it's almost one of the first real issues or first real drawing areas that are being brought in. If we turn the attention over to Europe, really what we see is maybe 3 different dimensions that could be at play here. The first is the degree of adoption of open banking. Europe took a much more, contrary to the U.S., regulatory-driven approach around open banking. They probably had a little bit of a leadership aspect, although now there's a lot of aspects of, has even the U.S. Moved ahead on adoption of open banking, the proliferation of APIs, sharing of information, etc. So I think the degree to which that evolves is going to be one piece. The other part is the proliferation of neobanks as well, because what we've seen a lot in Europe are aspects of digital first, digital native financial services propositions, starting there to the comments you made, owning the experience, and then expanding from there. So I think the degree to which we still see growth in those areas will be another driver. And then the third, and it's always hard to make blanket statements about Europe, but within each market in Europe, in each country, is the degree of public and private cooperation. Big example that we like to look at is, for instance, in Sweden, which has done a lot of interesting things to become a digital-only economy. We see a public-private partnership on Swish, which really became a payment platform overall, in a way that to enable people to do everything first from paying each other to then start to be able to pay in store. And that became something that wasn't viewed as a competitive differentiator, but sort of an app that supported everyone in the Swedish economy. So a lot of different approaches. One thing I will say is I do agree with Rajat that I think we're going to see some very interesting plays come to life in Australia with some of the proliferation, but then people taking it and sort of seeing some of these examples and kind of moving it to the next level.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, it's for sure. It's the battlegrounds around who's going to win across these segments, or the combination of apps that's going to win across these segments. Just bringing it back again to the customer, and maybe I start with you, Rajat. How do you think Australians will embrace the super app experience?
This is I think a more interesting one, Marlies, because on the surface, that idea and the concept of a one-stop shop for payments, financial, and lifestyle needs is very attractive, both from an experience point of view, but also if you start thinking about tangible benefits like instant credit or loyalty. But I think in my mind, before we're able to answer how Australians will respond to that, we've got to think about 2 or 3 things. One, I think the response to the super app experiment or campaign will vary by age groups and demographics in Australia. So on a personal case study of one, I've got all of these apps on my phone, admittedly a lot of them for business research, given what I do, but I still use at least 7 or 8 of them. And for someone in my age group, in my early 40s, I think I would gravitate to a super app if it gave me a really good experience, decluttered my phone, and maybe also brought me some better deals. But if you look at that across other younger age groups, I don't think it's the same thing. I think Australians are known to have a lot of apps on their phone. They like to use a lot of those apps a lot of the time. And they're also very comfortable switching from one provider to another for a better deal. And that switching will become even easier with more seamless onboarding processes. So I think we will see a mix. Ultimately, in my mind, it will come back to, is there a better experience and are there better deals that customers understand? The second thing that's also important to think about is those super apps in Asia went beyond payments and banking. They're actually true everyday lifestyle apps, financial and lifestyle apps. And for some of these contenders on the page, I think they will have to think outside of their industry as well if they are truly going to mount a challenge. So on that basis, I feel like we'll see some successes and some misses in Australia from a customer point of view, but that's actually a good thing because the customer will actually win because competition is going to be intense and innovation, if it's not already moving at lightning speed, will probably move even faster.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting point. And to your point around the difference between sort of the fintech and the big tech who've really focused around or started from a customer-centric, how can I solve a particular customer problem, while more the traditional banks have originally or historically always focused around product excellence, and at the moment trying to make that shift around what does customer centricity mean and how do we build the right partnerships around that. So very interesting point. Zach, maybe also keen to understand from you, what do you think of the potential uptakes of super apps across Europe and the US?
So I think there's going to be a variety of different drivers here. So obviously, I think we're, to the comments made previous, demographics will play a little bit, will play a role in it. One reason why demographics is going to play a role in it is trust. And I think certainly a big question is going to be, do consumers and also merchants sense that there's going to be levels of security and privacy put in place? So we talk about, and you mentioned earlier in your comments about the use of data. Big question here is, will that data be used in a benign and helpful way, or will there be a perception of over-targeting, oversharing of that data as well? And as we blend things that we hold very dear to us around our financial well-being versus, say, sometimes our day-to-day transactional well-being, how well is that data actually going to be shared, protected, and how much trust will people have in sharing that kind of data all in one location? Another area is also going to be around ease of use and onboarding. So as an example, in the same study that we talked about, people said, yes, I've now increased my mobile payments. There was an equal amount of response of, but it sure wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. Classic example, I used a mobile wallet at the point of sale because I didn't want to have any contact. And the next thing was, it asked me to enter a PIN. Then it asked me to validate if I wanted cash back. Then it asked me if I wanted to confirm the total amount. Then it even asked me to sign it. And so because of all of those, it was, what was the point of doing that type of transaction? So there still has to be a lot more elements designed in what the overall design looks like. If you're going to be contactless, can you be completely contactless? Which also then leads to the other part around merchants. And that's really in two forms. One is education. How best, when a consumer wants to use a super app, to be able to have the merchant be able to accept that and use that in an appropriate way. But then the other aspect is merchants themselves wanting to create their own experience. A big uptick we've seen is the ability to order and pay online or through your app, but then pick it up in person. We've seen that a lot, especially in the States, where you would basically alert them when you're in the parking lot, and they would come by with your food or your groceries or whatever the case may be. That kind of experience, merchants want to be able to provide that within their own app, which means embedding payments within that. So what that also means is multiple choices. There's a consumer side of a super app, but then there's the merchant aspect of it as well, which leads to then the fourth part of education. And so in all of these advancements, a lot of interesting things, and I think about the governor's comments about technology being ahead on this, and I completely agree. And it really goes back to education then. And how do you educate consumers and merchants that these are good propositions, why it's easy for them, why it's easy to use? If you have to go and explain it in a significant way, you're really going to struggle to get that kind of adoption, and you're going to have some customer confusion.
Right. Some really great points. Maybe moving now to the regulatory side. Rajat, how do you think Zach, how do you think regulators are approaching this space in the first instance, just building up on what you just said?
Sure, no problem. And as we've talked about, security, privacy are going to be huge drivers in this. And I think globally, what we've seen is really different approaches. As an example, Singapore, Hong Kong, some of the Southeast Asian economies have taken a much more interesting partnering approach. We heard even the conversation earlier today about developing new use cases, developing sandboxes and really kind of pulling in others to try to experiment and drive new approaches. I mentioned Sweden earlier. I also look at Estonia, India, and we talked about identity. really have been big on full digitization and financial inclusion. So you see the advancements around identity and trying to develop standards and using this as a way to open up the markets to make it more inclusive for everyone. Canada has taken a very much mandate driven approach. So we're going to see faster payments be a required adoption in Canada, with really a belief there of, well, how do we use that to actually then enable new innovation? US, we talked about very market driven approach, a little bit of a follower approach. They actually, you can see they're starting to look at, well, what is happening? And now, based on what we're starting to see, how do we start layering in appropriate guidelines, standards, and guardrails, but done very much in concert with the private sector? I think the important commonality is whether people are taking sort of the partnering approach, the offensive regulatory approach, a little bit of the receive and respond approach. Is the one commonality there is they're looking at processing payments. It should not be a strategic differentiator. It really should be a commonality. It should be a common good and a common need, and access should be in common. And it's really where you want to see innovation is outside of that, in terms of different types of use cases, the ability to personalize ideas, services, and insight, and the ability to enable individuals or businesses to be able to do more and do better things with their money. And really, from the regulatory approach, sort of take out the things that really shouldn't be differentiators and create the standards to enable that to happen.
Right. Rajat, what's your point of view from an Australian perspective?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Zach. And I was going to say, I feel like the wrong person to answer this question, coming after the governor and before Senator Bragg. But what I would add to that is, I think, Zach, you're absolutely right. The idea of payments processing being low cost, non-differentiated, or being a utility is very much adopted. That concept is adopted here as well. The two things I would add to the announcements yesterday are, one, thematically, it is looking to reform three things. One, or reform or put in place the right controls over three things. One, the regulatory architecture needs to be simplified and consolidated, which will happen now. Digital payments, like you said, digital payments processing needs to be on a level playing field. What that means will become more clear over the next 6 to 9 months. And crypto assets and exposure to crypto assets needs to be safe and controlled, which is the third theme. I think my perspective on this is the pace matters of making decisions and implementing changes, and making sure that the intent translates into the execution, where innovators are able to still work within the regulatory framework, find it easy to do business in Australia, and the risks are controlled. So again, very, very exciting space to watch for the next couple of years.
Right. So hopefully it's sort of clear in conclusion that listening to Rajat and Zach, and hopefully the brief presentation of myself, we believe, particularly in Australia, that the super apps will emerge, but there will remain optionality for consumers to sort of choose between super apps and more specialized apps, which I think is a great outcome. It really helps consumers to choose what's best for them, what suits their lifestyle needs, and hopefully get the best value for money, and make that trade-off decision between value for money versus ease and convenience potentially as well. Thank you all. We'll now take your questions. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Marlies, and thank you to the panel as well. I would start with one of my own. I think my reflection would be that there's a bit of a battle here about who owns the customer, and so I think a couple of points, maybe particularly for you, Zach, around the merchant piece in the US, because I think you're seeing that more there than we are necessarily here, but I think that could change quite rapidly. So I reflect on, the last time I was able to travel to the US, which seems eons ago, given COVID. But people paying in Starbucks with the Starbucks app and making a conscious choice to do that rather than use a banking app or Apple or Google or whatever it might be. So just thinking about the merchant perspective in owning the customer. And then the other reflection I have, which has more of an Australian context, is to think about Square's purchase of Afterpay and they're sort of linking someone who's been focused on the merchant as a customer with someone who's been focused on the consumer as a customer. And so any sort of reflections that either yourself or Rajat has on that. So Zach, if you're happy to start on that, that would be great.
Sure, no problem, Andy, and thank you for the question. I think a couple interesting points that have come out during the pandemic. The first to around merchants. The first is interesting. The U.S. was way behind on QR codes, and QR codes in the U.S. Were looked at as solutions looking for problems, and then COVID came and the problem came, and we saw pretty significant rollouts. And what was interesting is the merchant propositions that came from those. So everything from click here to view your menu, to then rollout of applications around click here, look at menu, order, pay, leave the restaurant entirely when you're done. And so merchants started to look at that and said, this has huge value. One, it made things safer during the pandemic, but we actually were able to turn tables faster, see more customers, and the like. Similarly, I brought up the buy now, pick up in store. Merchants now see that as not only is that a good service I'm providing, I'm also, again, able to serve more customers than ever before, both the ones that are in the store and the ones that I pick up. But it's a better platform for me to drive merchant rewards, enticements, loyalty as well. And so I think the interesting part that we're seeing here is are merchants, going to take this and try to actually now create even stronger propositions. And if you're on the payment or financial services side of the equation, you have to do almost two things. One is provide utility for me as a consumer to transact anywhere, but also be an acceptable option in that merchant's proposition as well. And so I think from there, we're going to see some really interesting strategies. Some are still going to try to say, I want to try to own everything within. Others are going to take maybe a little bit more of an open, all integrate in any different way that you want type of strategy.
What I would add there, Andy, is a couple of points. One, to answer that question, you have to go back to the point Marlies made earlier, which is the digital wallet or the phone is the new battleground for the customer. And for all of these organizations, what matters is that I'm speaking to my customer or interacting with my customer directly. So I think that battle will be fought, and there'll be some winners and some losers, and merchants will be in that battle as well. I think here in Australia, the second point in my mind is I think we'll see multiple multiple realities unfold, if that makes sense. I think we'll see segments where the super apps could capture the customer base and the experience, and you'll have merchants sort of having to partner with them. You might have merchant experiences that are just so unique and special that in that merchant, I'm still actually going to go out of my app and use that merchant experience. So I think we'll see a whole spectrum around this. And the last point on the Square acquiring Afterpay is I liken it to the way PayPal transformed from actually originally being a fintech focused on the merchant online payment experience, and over time now becoming a two-sided company. I think Square is on the same path, and that's the big motivator for the Afterpay acquisition.
That's really helpful. It helps with one of the questions on the feed as well, which was around, we're seeing proliferation, and then logically you see consolidation after that proliferation. And the question was, how if I'm going to win that battle, do I win? So I think there were some thoughts in those comments about that. So to me, one of the points you made, Zach, was it's about linking payments to, for example, loyalty. So that's a value add. You made a very good point, Rajat, that it's about the experience. And then I think the other point that you made, Zach, is that it's potentially collaborative as well. So how, as part of that experience, do I integrate to others? Are there any other thoughts that you have in there about what are the winning factors here in this contest?
I think we've covered the big themes: trust, experience, deals, loyalty. Marlies and I were talking about the toothbrush test, which is you are using this app at least once a day, if not twice a day. I think those are the things that will drive it. I think trust is a big one. Zach talked about it for the other markets. I didn't really talk about it before. We Australians, again, have a bit of an aversion to one organization knowing everything about us. So I think the brands that have the permission for it and they do it right and transparently will win.
And that actually leads to a bit of a theme coming through in the questions, which again you mentioned, which is around privacy and how do you ensure privacy. There's a couple of questions that talk about the security advice, standard security advice being around minimising complexity, attack surface, etc. Whereas actually super apps do the opposite. And so the question there is, is this a trade-off potentially between convenience and security? And if so, how do we make sure that we actually protect security and protect individuals' privacy? Marlies, do you want to maybe start on that?
I think it's an interesting topic, and I think that's where obviously the regulatory side will come in as well. And we've got some examples in the market where it's done really well and where there's still some customer scrutiny around how things have been dealt with data. I think it's yet to be seen what it's all going to mean. I think regulations such as open data and open banking would be an extremely stimulator for making sure that data is used in the most appropriate manner within Australia. I'm not sure, Zach, if you've got anything to add from a more US perspective as well on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the thing I would add to that, Marlies, on the privacy side is it's really going to also come down to in the US, what do people want to quote unquote opt in to do? And so there's a lot of aspects of, well, do you want to receive notifications when certain things happen? Do you want alerts when certain things happen? Do you want advice if certain events happen? And I think it's really going to be the degree to which those choices are clear, transparent, and understood by the consumer. And then I think the other aspect is to the degree that also my interaction with the app needs to be confined to me and the app. If there's any sort of belief that is, or activity that shows that is sort of bleeding beyond what that app is, then I think we're going to start to see a lot more different types of questions being asked. But if people feel that, hey, I can see my own activity and I get the things that I've chosen that I want to see, then I think there's going to be a good view that data and privacy is being handled appropriately. It's when you start to see weird targeted things like ads and the like that I think you're going to start to see sort of red flags come up.
Yeah. So I would then add the point, Andy, that I don't think those are trade-offs. I think all three have to be done right, in my mind. And again, in this battle or competition, the winners will do all of them right. Otherwise, over time, you are going to miss out. I also think that brings another theme to the fore, which is around transparency and education, and apps that do that better, because that's a space that's still somewhat early days. I think there's a lot more that can be done in that space, and particularly with all of the topics we're talking about today. I think we live and breathe this. I don't think the average person does, that's probably another big theme to think about in this kind of campaign.
Yeah, great points. Zach, you mentioned neobanks in Europe and the ability for them to go digital first and that be a key competitive element. My reflection on that is that that's not the case in Australia because Australian banking apps traditionally win Global Banking App of the Year, and so being digital first isn't enough. And there's a question in the feed here that talks to the limited payment options that are available in neobank apps, but also banking apps compared to the super apps in Asia, and just wondering whether actually that's a space that that neobanks or other tech players could seize as their competitive advantage, given digital first isn't going to be enough. So, can you bring lots of different payment solutions together, like billers, e-com, P2P, P2M, etc. Is that a potential differentiator? So if I sort of focus that in on neobanks, but you're happy to take that as a broader question as to how tech players compete here. Maybe Rajat, start with you.
I think that firstly, I think that is a phenomenally good question. And I also think that, again, the contenders that will do really well would be the ones that put the customer above their own internal conflicts or commercial cannibalization issues. Because ultimately, you have to look at the value of the customer and that experience. So it makes complete sense to me that if you are a banking app today, you want to bring all of those features around new payment methods and crypto assets all in the one experience. There's going to be trade-offs within that. But again, more so the incumbent financial institutions that are able to make those trade-offs will be the ones that succeed.
Excellent. Thank you. Marlies, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one small comment to add is that those trade-offs also go to, I guess, the commercial value that you want to get out of that, right? Not every interaction or every product and services, particularly if we're looking at the big tech proposition, and fintech proposition, is there to drive commercial value. For some of them, it's very much around deepening the interaction volume and engagement with customers. So there's going to be an interesting tension, I think, for organization itself around where along the customer journey are we really going to find a way to generate commercial value for us as an organization to reinvest, which is quite interesting, I think.
Okay, excellent. I might move. You mentioned the consumer data right, and particularly around PFM apps. And as I think about that, I think there are a couple of potential enablers for PFM within CDR, and they're all kind of on the horizon. So this is unfortunately. I know the governor gave everybody the opt-out on not having a crystal ball, but this is a crystal ball question. Okay. So effectively, CDR Future Directions thinks about action initiation, so things like enabling account switching, which could be very useful for PFM apps. Also, other types of action initiation, notably payment initiation, and that was mentioned, Marlies, I think, in your remarks about potential add-ons to PFM. The other piece there, which again you mentioned, Marlies, is the opportunity that what I always think of as a richer data lake. So when CDR expands into other sectors, the benefits that can bring to PFM. So I guess my question is, prioritise those in order. What's going to be the game changer for those kind of providers in Australia? Is it payment initiation? Is it account switching? Is it other sectors? What is the ordering there? And I recognise that's a harsh question, but
who's going first?
So I was going to throw to Marlies.
I'm happy to go first, but keen to get some perspectives from Rajat and Zach on this as well. I think it's a super broad question because I think there are all three are equally of value. I think potentially this is where the customer education bit comes in as well, where potentially the first use case might be very much meeting the needs of customers is very much focused around how can I see all my financial information in one go and expand it from further from there to switching and to other payment types of options. Like from a general perspective, that's the most logical flow. But I do believe from a customer relationship, and personally, I don't really like the word owning the customer relationship. I think all three of them will have a really important place to play. Hopefully,
Zach, you want to go next? I can go last.
Sure. As the total foreigner to the group, so my predictions for the Australian market should be regarded pretty low. But I would say, just the general thesis is payments, and obviously I'm a little biased, but we did some research, and about 10, 15 years ago, the belief was if you were a financial institution, if you held the lending relationship, you were sort of in that larger share of wallet type aspect in terms of how you serve the customer. Then about 5, 8 years ago, if you redid that, everyone sort of thought, well, no, you have to own the core account. And that would make you sort of the to use Marlies' not least favorite term, owner of the relationship, but the one that was sort of front of mind. In our belief, it's payments when we look at it now. And it's if you can own the paying relationship, which is really the thing that your customers do multiple times every single day more than any other banking, money related activity, we think that is what puts you into the position to have maybe a little bit more either ownership or loyalty or stickiness to the customer. And I'd probably even just organize it as paying first, then the financial management and the data side of it second, because now you can then provide advice and insight into the best ways to use that money as well to the goals of the consumer or the business. And then really third then becomes the sort of, if you will, the account to account place.
Okay, so I'll offer a slightly, I'll do a variation on Zach's view to keep this interesting. I think, and this is again my own personal experience of, limited experience of PFM so far. I actually think PFM and Insights is on top at the moment for the reason that you need to be able to trust that app to actually understand you. And I think the data, as the data feeds get richer, and as the, I guess, AI gets more and more sophisticated around it, we're going to start trusting those apps. Like they do understand my financial position, they do understand my goals. And so I'm going to now trust the app to make payments on my behalf. And so I'm going to trust the app to get me the best deal. I think that's the logical flow in my head. So that's my prediction, if you will.
Great. Thanks for all pulling out your crystal balls on that one. I'm now going to move to a couple of apps that we didn't see on screen and just quiz you about whether they have a role to play here. So the first one relates to a question that's on the feed, which is around government and whether government apps could actually be super apps. And in asking that question, I reflect on a session that we held on Monday around digital identity, and clearly there's a lot of thinking going on around how government drives different experiences actually. And you would have seen the announcement now 2 weeks ago about the desire to get all of government services, federal government services online by 2025. So you can start to see how that might form a bit of a super app for government services. And then there's a question there where those services involve payment either to the government or from the government. You know, clearly it needs to be integrated in the same way as other super apps. So interested, I think, probably to start with Zach in terms of whether you're seeing anything globally in terms of government thinking about that app concept, and then we might flow to Marlies next, and then Rajat gets to go last again.
Okay.
Zach.
Absolutely. So happy to tee it up. I would say yes, and actually, one of the examples was at a conference by The Economist about a month or so ago. We talked about smart cities and enabling payments, and so Certainly, you brought up a great example, Andy. Just we saw in the U.S. even about the ability for people to receive stimulus funds, support funds because of the pandemic as one piece of it, but then also had the conversation and discussed a little bit what we're seeing, for instance, in UAE, other places as smart cities, where essentially apps do everything, not just about receiving government funds, but taking public transportation as an example, making arrangements, appointments, to handling things like parking tickets and fines and things like that, or even paying for basic licenses. So absolutely, definitely see that happening today, and think it has, especially in regards to bundling related types of transactions, has actually also has a huge amount of benefit.
Yeah, I think from an Australian perspective, where Jot can add to this, I completely agree with Zach. For the Australian market as well, I think there would be extremely a lot of value in a government app that facilitates payments, in particular related to more government-related services, and having that all in one place. And potentially there's obviously the opportunity, as per the governor of the RBA sort of said, what is this going to mean from a CBDC perspective as well, and how does this come into interplay as well? So definitely, yes, a really extremely important topic to think about, what the government's super app might look like. And it's going to be interesting to see what the speed of change around that is going to be as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think in my mind, this again comes back to the point around coexistence of multiple realities or options. In this conversation, you could think of government as a very big merchant or service provider. And now the government experience is actually so unique and so integrated and so easy that for all of that side of my life, I'm using that app, but I don't think I'm going to put all my banking and investments into the government app either. I don't know. I don't think so. Yeah. So yeah. I think, yes, it's a coexistence scenario.
And therefore back to that sort of integration and collaboration piece as well.
Yes.
Okay, so the second one, it would be remiss to discuss apps and not think of Facebook or Meta. So that wasn't there. How do we think about, the social media apps and their potential role in this? Obviously, a lot of them have thought long and hard about payments and had various proof of concepts and initiatives in the payment space. What do we think there? I kind of go back to my question about who owns the customer and the toothbrush test.
Yeah.
Those who have Facebook use it regularly. So do they have a role to play here as a potential super app as well? Zach, I'll start with you. Rajat will go second this time, and then I'll come to Marlies.
Excellent. Yes, Andy, short answer is yes. And we see it today. I think in the US, for instance, Venmo, which is a service provided by PayPal, really started as a sort of social media feed and payments, where if you paid someone, you add emojis, and everyone sees who you pay. And it's since expanded to be able to pay for merchants. It has a crypto option as well in it as well. So, and you can see the intersection of people, again, depends on demographic. They have controls over who they want to provide information to, but you see that kind of intersection. Twitter now has the ability where you can provide a tip to someone. If you really like the content they're producing, you can actually give them money as well. So I think we already are seeing the activation of social media apps, and you mentioned, Facebook/Meta, in India, for instance, WhatsApp as an ability to send money as well. So it's already in play today. I think the question, no different than any of the other propositions, becomes twofold. One, degree of breadth of types of transactions, and then fundamentally a comfort level that people would have in engaging in those kinds of transactions through those platforms.
I think that was the key point I was going to pick on, which is what comfort level would I have if Facebook or Meta is now my financial and banking and social and lifestyle super app. I'm not going to give you my personal, but I think they are facing some publicly, visible trust issues. So that's the brand permission question that comes back, which is how do you actually, can they do it? Yes, but they will have to win that brand permission. I think would be the challenge. I don't know, Zach, if that makes sense.
And Marlies, anything to add on that?
No, I think Zach and Rajat mentioned it all. I think it's the brand permission, and it's all around trust and privacy. And I think obviously we got the example with Facebook already in the market around, how is data being dealt by those organizations. So that's going to be the key driver in terms of adoption in Australia more broader.
Excellent. Well, thank you to the Deloitte panel. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Marlies. Thank you, Rajat. That was fascinating and an excellent range of questions on the feed. We're inspired by that. So thank you so much for your time today.